Hello, everyone. Thank you for standing by. All participants are in listen-only mode, and as a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be archived on constructionbusinessowner.com. You may contact ReadyTalk customer service with any technical questions. I'm Kathy Wells, editor of Construction Business Owner magazine, and welcome to Demystifying the Digital Transformation Trend, presented by AJ Waters and Construction Business Owner magazine. Today's webinar is sponsored by InEight, and we'll discuss how to simplify the process of adopting new digital technologies. InEight combines technology with a unified vision, delivering actionable insights and project certainty to more than 25,000 active users in more than 500 companies. Built on the history of construction and engineering excellence, InEight solutions help companies visualize, estimate, manage, control, and connect all aspects of capital and maintenance projects. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce our expert speaker, AJ Waters. AJ Waters is the Director of Industry Solutions at InEight, where he works with customers to develop solutions that help solve their greatest project challenges. Previously, he managed the Center of Excellence team for the Kiewit Technology Group and served as a program manager at Google, guiding the digital transformation of its global data center construction operations. He holds a master's degree in structural engineering from the University of Nebraska and a bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from Duane University. At this time, it's our pleasure to begin the webinar. Please stay tuned after the presentation for the interactive Q&A session, and please send your questions through the chat feature, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Now I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to AJ to get us started. AJ?
Thank you, Kathy, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And one thing I do want to clear up. I know the picture it says a lot, and I'm sure you're all thinking how great I look. But really, truly, don't let the picture fool you. My first digital transformation was taking paper drawings and putting them on a computer. When I started out in construction, like many of you, I had a roll of drawings and a stack of colored pencils that I used to do takeoff, and that right there is how we did our work. We colored up the drawing, we did a few quick calculations, and then we entered that into a DOS estimating system. For those of you who remember DOS, so it's been a long journey, and I've gone through a couple of these. The first one being going to an on-screen takeoff solution as just a point solution for our estimating department to solve that one problem. But one of the things we were very cognizant of in starting this webinar or coming up with today's topic is we put the term digital transformation in quotations for a reason, and that's really because that phrase or that concept in the industry has kind of got a bad rap. And what it is the phrase tends to be scary to some, just because it tends to have a lot of other thoughts that come along with it. When you first hear the term digital transformation, probably one of the first things that comes to mind is dollar signs. That's gonna cost us a lot of money. And if we want to jump in or try to make some big process change and adopt some sort of technology, it's going to be expensive. Other things that people think of is the time aspect. Any digital transformation that we're going to undergo will require time, not just to select a solution, but then to implement it, to get people up to speed on it, and to realize any sort of ROI from it. Also, one of the things that has come to mind a lot when we talk to customers is what kind of hardware do I need to support this? I'm running around with a single laptop. I don't want to have to buy a dozen tablets, or I don't want to have to, upgrade my servers back at the office to handle this sort of bandwidth. And what kind of hardware? A lot of times that goes back to the money question. And then obviously we are all in people businesses. Construction is still a very people-focused set of operations. It requires skilled craft and skilled labor. And what's it going to take to get my people up to speed on any sort of digital transformation that we try to go undertake? And this is typically what happens when someone mentions the phrase or the idea or the concept of digital transformation. The alarm bells start going off, and we start thinking, oh, that's going to cost so much money, take so much time, and really disrupt our people. And one of the reasons for that, back in 2018, McKinsey did a survey, and they found out that just 16% of organizations were seeing sustainable performance improvements from digital transformations, and that's a really small number. When you really dig into it, 16% is not a very good success rate, and so that lure, that fear of undergoing a digital transformation, and that mantra that kind of comes with it, that's something that we want to try to piece through today. And so one of the first things that we want to do is, well, let's talk about what a digital transformation is. Why do we have these kinds of fears or these thoughts when we first hear that phrase? And when you look at the definition, the short form definition of digital transformations, it's the use of new, fast, or frequently changing technology problems, or technology to solve problems, rather. And right away, for me, the concept of fast and frequently changing is one of those alarm bells, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to put in or go through this major transformation, and technology is changing so fast and so frequently that I'm not going to be able to keep up. And as soon as I put something new in, I've got to go rip it out and replace it with the next new thing, right? And so that's one of the big fears around this definition. And the longer answer, if you go to the enterprise project and you ask them to define it, it talks about the fundamentally changing your business, but then it gets into it being a culture change and continually challenging things and getting comfortable with failure. And again, you can see why the cost, the time, the hardware, the people change management, why those thoughts continue to just creep up in our minds. And so as I mentioned, today's agenda is really pretty straightforward. What we're going to try to do today is to remove some of that mystique or some of that bad rap from the term digital transformation. We want to unpack it a little bit and dissect it in a way that makes it a little bit more comfortable. And one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to explore what has changed recently to make it so that digital transformations can be something that is consumed by an organization of any size, any shape. And once we do that, we'll take a look at, what are some of the signs, what are the hints that maybe a digital transformation could be right for your organization. And if you are kind of tracking along with those hints, we'll talk about one of the key things you need to focus on when it comes to solving problems with technology, and that's making it intuitive. And then we'll wrap up at the end with some ideas to get you started, determining how you can begin jumping into a digital transformation if this is something that sounds right or sounds fair to you. So first and foremost, let's talk about why digital transformations are no longer just for the big boys. It's not about the companies that have large amounts of capital to invest and all the time and the resources available. And so why is that? What has changed? Well, over the last decade, there have been a few major advancements in technology that really changed the landscape. Specifically, when you dive into it, it has changed the landscape for capital projects and construction in general. And those three things are mobile technologies becoming more mainstream, cloud computing really taking off, and user experience taking a front seat. And while that last one's not necessarily a technology, it is being embraced by technology, and that's what's really key in this. So let's take a look at each one of these individually. First off, mobile becoming mainstream. It wasn't much over 10 years ago when myself and probably most of you were walking around with one of these. This is what the business user had, and the goal was for there to be kind of that 24/7 communication, the ability to respond or take action on something that popped up, and the keyboard provided a quicker way to get to that response. And the little blue light obviously notified us when one of those messages came through. But what's really interesting about this particular device is when you recall what everyone else had, right? The average consumer was walking around with a device that could barely send a text message. You had to hit the same button 3 times to get the letter you wanted. And so it made for this divide between your average daily consumer and the business user, and it caused for there to be, you know, different technologies that were being consumed at different levels. But then, as we mentioned a little over 10 years ago, something happened. A phone launched, and while the iPhone isn't the only one, it was the first. And very shortly thereafter, more and more popped up. And it wasn't just a business-only device. Today, everyone has one. Your average person in the field, your average employee is walking around with one of these in their pocket already. Not just something that can handle communication as far as instant knowledge or action or a decision being made, but maybe more important to construction, there is a camera in everyone's pocket when it comes to documenting what's going on the job site. And so mobile became mainstream, and that really started to change this concept of digital transformation. The other major technology piece that took off was the concept of cloud computing. And it's been almost 20 years now since the first couple of streaming services launched. I bet if I were to have asked you, thinking all the way back to 2003 for iTunes or 2005 for YouTube, it seems like it was just yesterday when those things took off. But it really wasn't until 2006 when the first provider of an enterprise cloud deployment came into the foray, and that was Amazon. Shortly thereafter, that gave way to Netflix. That's what Netflix uses, and why it was one of the first out of the gate. But then came Google and Microsoft, and the big three rounded out. And now everyone has an enterprise cloud system. If I were to ask, most of you today are probably using Office 365 or Google Docs now as a way to move your email and your documentation and everything to the cloud. But even looking at this, 10 years ago was the last time, you know, a major provider jumped into the cloud. But even so, in the last 5 years, Amazon is still seeing exponential growth of their cloud business. And what's happened is cloud computing has taken off to a level that now operations in the cloud and calculations that used to require a load of RAM on your local machine are being done in milliseconds, real time, and every device is getting that update. And so cloud computing taking off really was a key change in the consumption of digital transformation. And the last one of these, again, is user experience taking a front seat. And if we go back to our example of mobile technology, in today's world, when you hand one of those mobile devices to anyone, they can use them almost immediately. They're intuitive. They're very simple. You understand where to tap. You know how to swipe. It's all very second nature to us, regardless of age or where you live or what your background was. And one of the key reasons for that often goes unlooked is user experience. The number of user experience professionals whose sole job it is to make your life easier when it comes to softwares is continuing to climb across the world. In 2000, it was less than 10,000 total. But in 2010, it was up to 100,000, and now in 2020, we're just over 1 million. So with the number of people focusing on the ease of use of your solutions going up by 10x every 10 years, you can see how it becomes much easier to consume things like digital transformation. So the question is, really, how does all this help? Well, first and foremost, if you're talking about devices that everyone already owns, a lot of times that can help to alleviate upfront costs. The device is already in their pocket. You don't really have to do a lot to get them to use it. They're pretty familiar with it. They use it every day to text or talk or email. And so it relieves that first strain. But the second thing it does is it also relieves the time strain. It's not as difficult for us to get up to speed on. We already use it. We're familiar with it. It's intuitive. And when you bring in the cloud, software as a service, and items that are hosted elsewhere and already installed, deployments are quicker. Because you're not installing software on local machines and going from machine to machine to machine to make sure that the software is installed and it's updated. Both of those combine to be very beneficial when it comes to the hardware. We already talked about it. These people have these devices in their pockets already. Cloud computing typically runs in a browser. So as long as the machine that you have is able to ping the internet, it's not about getting a new machine with faster speeds or capabilities, because all of the computation effect is happening somewhere else. And again, the training is typically easier because it's stuff that we already know, stuff that we're already used to, and it's delivered electronically. No more reading long manuals or trying to page through documents to understand what's happening. And all of this combines into digital transformations being something that anyone can consume, and not so much just one of those things that big companies with a lot of capital are able to do. So if you're tracking with us so far, then the next thing that you're going to want to take a look at is, what are some of the signs that we're ready to make a change? I understand that digital transformations, they can be done at any level. So how do I know if I'm ready for one? What we're doing is working, everything's fine. We don't really have a lot of major issues or pain points. So what should I be on the watch for? And really there's a couple of common industry challenges that we tend to see either in construction or capital projects that are telltale signs that you're about ready or that you're struggling with something that maybe a digital transformation could solve. The first one is the good old paper processes. If you still have a lot of paper on your job sites, you might be ripe for a digital transformation. If you're wrestling to report on disconnected systems, or if you're struggling to leverage historical data, those are also both places where maybe a digital transformation is right for you. Or the last one, you just keep getting requests from your employees that something needs to change. They are saying there are better ways to do this, and asking you for those better ways. And again, we'll unpack each one of these a little bit. So dealing with paper processes, I already mentioned when I first started in construction, it was about a roll of drawings and a stack of colored pencils. And we'd color that drawing up and we'd get all of our calculations done, and lo and behold, out would come an addendum. And then it would be about, do I have the right version? And if I don't, let me cut out this clouded area here. I'm going to tape it over the top of the takeoff I already did. I'm going to recolor it, and I'm going to make some adjustments to my calculation, right? And that's something that we find a lot of companies are still struggling with is, most importantly, do I have the most up-to-date version of the drawing? Or has there been a release up to this point? The other paper process that we see more often than not is the time card. Everybody remembers tracking out in the field. You got the employees down the left, the cost codes across the top, and when you flipped it over, you filled out your log and everybody signed and said they weren't hurt, right? And it's not so much the time card or the collection of that data that is the issue. It's more what happened after. Because that time card has more than one person that it needs to go to afterward. Obviously, payroll needs it. You got to pay the people whose hours are on the card. But typically, the safety department wants to know how many hours you worked while people were saying they weren't injured. So they need to get a look at the hour total. You likely need to send it to the person who's in charge of your quantity tracking or your percent complete. How much quantity did we get installed, and what can we claim and then therefore bill to the client? If there's a rework code on that time card, your quality guy probably wants to know about it. The quality department or person is going to track that and understand how much time they're focusing on in rework. And the list can go on and on, right? And so it's the whole process of passing the time card around to all these different people that becomes very manual. And in today's technology landscape, both of these are solved. Drawings can be overlaid, right? You can get notifications that the page that you're looking at is the wrong drawing, and here's a link to get to the right one. We're very quickly able to access things with mobile devices right at our fingertips. And with the time card, same thing. That mobile device, whether it's the one in your pocket or a tablet version, takes you right to where the work is to do the capture, but at the same time, when you hit submit, it can be routed to however many different departments or people you need to send it to. So if you're dealing with a lot of paper processes still, that might be a sign that you're ready for a digital transformation. The next one is wrestling to report on disconnected systems, and this is probably one of the biggest ones that we come across when we're working with customers. Is they've gone out and they have made some changes to digital solutions. Maybe they went out and they got an estimating system to replace Excel, or they got a timekeeping system to replace the paper time card, or maybe even a document system that does takeoffs and electronic documents. But what happens is when you want to take all of those systems together and you want to report your percent complete against the original quantity based on what the field captured, you've got to do some sort of export and call on our good old buddy Excel to run a pivot table, right? And hopefully the cost codes line up with one another and we're both tracking from the same system. And hopefully, nobody spelled anything wrong, because then it's not going to match. And your charts or your graphs are going to have jumps or dips or things that are not expected when it comes to trying to determine what happened between these different systems. So if you're still wrestling to try to pull all this data into a single source of reporting, a digital transformation might be right for you. One that's near and dear to my heart is struggling to leverage historical data, and here's why. Even before I was an estimator coloring up those drawings, I was an intern in college at a metal building manufacturer, and this was my job every single day as an intern. I went to the warehouse. So we had a warehouse off-site, huge warehouse, and in that warehouse were racks and racks of drawings and folders and boxes, and what this warehouse was all of the past projects that this company had done. They'd been around a long time. They had a lot of past projects. And my internship was spent going to the warehouse, grabbing the next box, and standing in front of a large format scanner to pull in all of the information. The company was worried about that warehouse going up in smoke and losing all of that historical data. So my job was to every day create a new file folder, and then when I had the file folder created for that project, hit scan. And while that's all well and good, it solves problem number one. If the building goes up in smoke, we have our historical data. The one problem is, in looking at that set of files, tell me where the cost report is. Or I'm building another building for that client. It's similar in nature, just in a different city, and I want to know what productivity factors I had last time. Where can I go find the production report? And while we have those things, obviously, looking at a list of file names with dates associated to them makes it very difficult to solve that problem. And so if you're struggling to leverage your past projects or to pull in your historical data, maybe a digital transformation is right for you. But the last one that I tend to have some fun with folks sometimes is just the continual request from employees. And again, this goes back to that device that's in most of our pockets these days. Whether it's new grads coming out of college who have grown up with this their entire lives, or it's just your typical employee that now is communicating with their kids this way. The majority of our employees communicate with a mobile device, and a lot of times face-to-face, especially now. And we're asking them to put one of these on their desk and figure out how to dial, right? Or the way that they share content is wirelessly. They never have to plug into anything. They can share whatever they want. And we're in the middle of the conference table at the office trying to find the right cord. And is it long enough? Will it connect to my computer? Or maybe the way that we handle our financials and track our banking, well, that all happens at the tip of a finger. And we're at work looking for the next Excel super spreadsheet. Or going back to the college concept, these new employees have gone all through school using digital technologies to learn in their classes, and we're saying, hey, go color up that drawing. And what ends up happening is at home I get to be George, but at work I'm pedaling my car like Fred. And a lot of times that causes some strife, or you get a lot of requests from employees, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. And if you're hearing those, maybe it's time to take a look at a new solution. And the follow-up question to that always is, well, what kind of solution should I take a look at? What's my end goal? And more than anything else, more than any specific problem statement or any specific all-in solution, the one thing that I think everybody can agree on is that the new solution needs to be intuitive. It's got to be something that users want to use and that is simple to use. And so again, going back and let's define what do you mean exactly by intuitive. Well, that means having the ability to understand something without any evidence or reasoning behind it. A few examples are psychics. they're intuitive. That's how they read people, right? But probably more specifically for many of us, mothers or fathers, they're intuitive when we're trying to lie to them, right? They can see right through us. But if we were to relate this to what we're actually discussing today, a process or a software can be said to be intuitive if it's easily learned without training. Think about the first time you picked up the device in your pocket to send a text message. For many of us, we didn't have to sit down and read a 5-page manual that said tap the Messages app, enter in a contact, and start typing a message. And it also wasn't too entirely difficult to figure out how to put in a smiley face or a monkey face or a firework of some sort, right? Emojis. We could just naturally do that. So what is it specifically that makes software intuitive? Well, since this isn't one of my areas of expertise, I actually sat down and I interviewed InEight's director of UI UX, Fred Hall, and I grabbed a couple of quotes from him specifically. And the first thing that he told me is, it needs to use some sort of applied knowledge. And what applied knowledge does for a user interface is it allows people, they're going to want to or love to use it versus being forced to open it up because they hate it. Again, think back to some of maybe the digital transformations you've done in the past. Was the software truly more efficient or easier to use than maybe the piece of paper? Sometimes they weren't, because it was before user interface really became a focal point. But what applied knowledge does is, if I were to tell you press a button, you'd probably know which one was good and which one was bad, right? Green means go, red means stop, cancel, get out, right? That's applied knowledge. Never press the red button. We hear that all the time. And so that's an example. Another example of utilizing applied knowledge is international symbols, right? This is the power button. We all kind of understand that. Another one that we typically all understand is the volume button. But in this example, this is a bad example of utilizing applied knowledge. Typically, when we click on the volume, we expect that scroll to go up and down. And in this example, it goes left to right. So that would be an example of not utilizing applied knowledge. The other thing that an intuitive software will do is it will simplify your workflows. Many of us are familiar with Excel. We're engineers. That's what we do. We use spreadsheets. And what you're probably going to see here is you're going to recognize Excel before the new file slide out and Excel after the new file slide out. And while the new file slide out was, in the long run has been helpful, I'm sure you all remember the first time that you tried to go look for an Excel file to open. You hit File, and there's the slide out. Then you're like, okay, I need to open something. And so there's the next view of the slide out. Well, I haven't opened it before, so it's not in my reasons list, so I have to hit Browse. And then finally, here comes the file browser on Windows, right? So it was a multi-click process the first time you tried to do that. But when you look at the workflow, how it used to be, click File, there's your drop-down menu, click Open, and there's your file browser. And what happened was they took what was only 2 clicks, File Open, and they turned it into 3 clicks, File Open, Browse, and so a lot of people didn't like that file slide out when it first launched. Because it didn't simplify the workflow, it actually made it a step more complex. But one thing that Excel did right with this is specifically the location of file. Location matters. One of the other keys to UI UX is the concept of the law of locality, and while we won't get into the specifics of that, we all know where files at when it comes to a program that we have open. And one of the things that this example also denotes is on the left-hand side, you're seeing a Windows machine, on the right, a Mac. And one of the things that location didn't do well is the close button and the maximize and the minimize buttons. Macs and PCs have those on opposite sides of the system. So that's one of the hardest things to relearn if you change an operating system. Location matters. But really, more than anything else, an intuitive solution doesn't make me think. I don't want to have to think through this. I don't want to have to guess or experiment or read a manual or ask others to help me through it. And to just give an example of that, let's go back to our friend from before. One of the most intuitive softwares that I can think of is the camera on a mobile device. It looks like a camera. You tap on it, it opens up, and there's one button. You push the button. Don't believe me that that's an intuitive software? Look at your local electronics stores demo tablets and take a look at the camera roll. I bet you'll find something similar to this. This happens to be my daughter's iPad, but she very quickly figured out how to snap that photo and take all sorts of pictures of herself, right? And it's just an intuitive thing that you don't need training. You don't have to think real hard. You just tap the camera, tap the button, away you go. So let's kind of take everything that we've learned up to this point. Let's put a nice little bow around it. Let's say that you've followed along to here and you're in agreement. Digital transformations, those are right for anyone. We've got some of those telltale signs, and we know that we need something that's intuitive. Where should we start? Well, first and foremost, it's always a good idea to do a couple of sanity checks. Ask yourself, are we truly prepared for this? Do we have the right people in place to make it work? And do we know what's important to us really? And when we look at each one of these specifically, while we talked a lot about how the cost and the time impact have been minimized from new technology, they don't completely go away. And so are you allocating budget for it? And are you expecting it to take some sort of time? Because it will take time. Also, people are still involved. It's a very people-heavy business. So has change management been accounted for? These are some of the questions you can ask yourself to truly dive into, are we prepared to attack a digital transformation? When it comes to having the right people, one of the first things you need to ask yourself is, what do we consider a stakeholder? And I'm not talking about the guy next to the tent who's waiting for his hand to get hit by the hammer, right? A stakeholder is the person whose job is truly going to be impacted by the transformation you're looking to change. It's not an executive that doesn't push the buttons at the same level as the superintendent or the engineer, but it's those truly executing the process each and every day and getting some sort of impact or gaining some sort of advantage from making a change. But all that being said, executives are truly required. You need some sort of champion or sponsor in the executive wing that's going to help allocate the budget, allocate the time, find the appropriate stakeholders, right? And so there's definitely a place for both types of people. If you're missing either one of those, it's going to be difficult to get something implemented or get it across the line. Lastly, what's most important to us really? And the reason I bring this one up is because when we sit down with customers and we ask them, you know, you're looking at us as an opportunity or an option for a new software or a digital transformation, what are you looking to gain out of this? And inevitably, everybody says, we want to be more efficient. Okay, that's great. What does more efficient mean? Is that, do you want to take clicks away from a process? Do you want to have higher throughput? Do you want to reduce overheads? Do you want to increase profits? What does more efficient mean to you? And more importantly, how will you quantify success of a digital transformation? What KPIs, what metrics, what are you after? What are you chasing to try to quantify success? And it really comes down to the old methodology, is it a SMART goal? And we see these goals a lot, and many times what happens is we see SMAR goals. It's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic. But a lot of times people forget the T on the end. We want this to be time-bound. There's got to be some sort of intensity or goal to get this across the finish line. If we're not really time-bounding our goal, then we don't have the same kind of buy-in. We don't have the same kind of sponsorship, right? And then don't forget to always be thinking about what's next. We talked about the definition of a digital transformation being continually changing, ever-changing technology. And so if you're going to go tackle one problem, make sure you're thinking in the back of your mind, what is going to be the next thing? And are we prepared to tackle both, or at least to some context report on both? We don't want to end up in that same position where we can't report across disparate systems or disconnected data. Always be thinking about what's next and what could be the next journey based on the problems that you solve up front. And so you really want to focus in on fixing pain points. Going back to McKinsey, digital transformations are only successful if there's a clear definition of what will create business value. What is really important to you? In other words, don't go out and buy a bunch of drones because it sounds cool, but because there is a clear definition of how it will create business value. And I use drones as an example because they're kind of another key buzzword in the industry right now, but make sure you know what you're chasing, right? And so there are some quick wins that you can look for, especially when it comes to construction and capital projects. We talked about some of those quick wins that are ripe for a digital transformation, things like documents, and the ability to get those up in the cloud and available on any device, no matter where you're at any time. We talked about time tracking and the ability to get it mobile and submitted to as many departments as necessary. But there's one other quick win that we indirectly talk about in one of the places that I think is ripe, and that's cost management, specifically when it comes to leveraging historical data and looking back at what you've done before, using that to look at what you want to do in the future. So those are some of the ways that you can get started as far as what are some questions we need to ask ourselves and where are there places that we could find maybe a quick win when it comes to construction. So let's do a real quick review and then we'll jump into some of your questions. Today what we did is we tried to take that phrase of a digital transformation and break it down a little bit and understand why they are working, and not just why they are working now for some people, but for everyone. We took a look at why they are not just for the large companies anymore. And we took a look at what signs point toward needing to undertake one of these. And if you're seeing some of those signs, what does it mean to find an effective solution, something that's intuitive? And then we walked through quickly some places where you can begin if you're ready to take that next step. So thank you all for listening up to this point. We'll open it up for Q&A and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, AJ. You made some really great points in those slides, and it looks like it's got our attendees thinking. So, AJ, if you're ready, we'll dive right into these questions from the audience. And everyone in the audience, if you still have questions, please feel free to shoot those over through the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Okay, let's start off. And I think you just touched on this, AJ. For companies looking to undergo a digital transformation, you mentioned a few areas that were ripe for quick wins. Where should I start?
That's a great question, and it really goes back, even those quick wins like documents and time tracking and cost management. Those are great options to think about, but it goes back one step even further, one slide further, in focusing on a pain point, right? And where are you struggling maybe to get through a manual process? What is taking longer than it should, or where are you losing data? Maybe there's a place where things have to be simplified down, and you're not getting the same level of detail that you used to be getting. So look really closely for either data leakage like that you're losing, or for a process that just has too many steps. And those are great places to start taking a look at digital transformation.
Cool, thanks, AJ. Let's hit this next question here. Do you have any suggestions on which solutions we should prioritize that can help accelerate our digital transformation?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to point to, and it's probably more my background than anything else, but if you're looking to dive into a digital transformation and do it quicker, focusing on the round trip path of costs, right? One of the most important things on construction projects is knowing your costs and knowing your production rates. And so if you focus on that journey of a cost from estimating out to the field and then capture in the field back into cost control, billing the client, and then to the next estimate, right, leveraging the historical data, that path is one of the best paths that you can look at as a place to get started.
Great, thanks. We just had a question come through, and I want to push it to the front. Do you see COVID-19 accelerating the need for digital transformation in our industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think we're all kind of seeing it. This change, this pandemic that's forced a lot of people indoors, is just another reason why the cloud is so prevalent in non-construction related instances. When you think of just being away from the job site, but still being able to see the cost and see the productivity and be able to make decisions remotely, yes, I do see this impacting in a way. Obviously it's not going to solve every problem, as skilled labor is still very much important to a construction project, but it will allow more people the opportunity to get away from the job site, as far as being able to still see into what's happening, thanks to the ability to leverage data from any location in the cloud.
Great question. That was from Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. Our next question: our company has unique needs. Should I be looking for customizable or modular software, and does that even exist?
You know, that's a really good question, and we get this a lot. Every company is unique and has some processes that are their secret sauce, right? And so what do you want to look for in a solution to make sure that you don't lose that? And while there are some modular and customizable solutions out there, I would be cautious with those to truly understand, do you need to go to that level, or can you adopt or change or somehow adapt a more best practice process in the way that you do work? And And the reason I say that is when you start talking about customization and you start talking about making those modular adaptations, that is where you start to see the ramp up in time and cost for that digital transformation. So there's a fine line there and a delicate balance that you're going to want to play, and just make sure, going back to knowing what's important to you, make sure you know what pains you're trying to solve, and where you maybe have some wiggle room to thin or adjust or make modifications to the processes that you use today.
Okay, let's get to our next question then. Amelia is asking, when you say is change management accounted for, where do you look for the answer to that question?
Good question. So change management often gets overlooked, and the reason being is it's difficult to know what that means. And so when we say is change management accounted for, the main thing that I want people to know, whether it's an executive or a stakeholder, is they need to understand that with any change in process and any big transformation like this, there will be a dip in productivity. You're not immediately going to be as productive as you were right out of the gate. You're going to have to allow for a learning curve, and it's going to happen. And so when I say is change management accounted for, that's the first thing that I want everybody to know. Do you recognize, realize, and have you accepted that there will be a little bit of a dip in the learning curve? Past that, the question is, okay, how do we learn? And change management is very much wrapped around how do we learn and how do we get buy-in. So there's two key things that we typically recommend. Some sort of internal group of users, whether you want to call them champions or super users or whatever phraseology you might want to use. Look for a key group of somewhat vocal and passionate and positive folks that are looking to help drive that change, and having those voices in and amongst the people will be helpful. And then look for how the change is going to be driven through training. What does the provider that you're looking at offer as far as training and flexibility with learning, and what are you planning to do to customize, minimize, or strengthen that learning to your individual processes?
Yeah, and AJ, you've led us kind of straight into the next question. Do you have any tips and tricks for making going digital attractive to resistant employees?
Oh, that's a good question. So there still are a few employees that are resistive. I'll give you that. But what we're finding more often than not is again, these people are using the technology every day in other things that they do. And so it's really not that much of a leap for them to jump into it on the job site. But if you do have a few of those, one of the things that we noticed, and I'll just use one of my quick win examples going forward, is the Foreman time card, putting the time card digitally. There are a lot of people that tend to fight that. And so one tip that we had is we gave it to them for a week and said, just try it and document all the reasons why you hate it. And then we'll go back and we'll talk and you can explain it to us. And what inevitably ends up happening, right, is they fall in love with it and you can't take it from them at the end of that week. And so that's one tip, is to go in there with a trial or some sort of prove it mindset that we're going to let you try it and you tell us all the reasons it won't work, and 9 times out of 10 you come out of that and everything's better. The other thing that you struggle with, though, and it's more going back to the customizable question, is people are worried about going digital because it's going to change the process a little bit or streamline it or do something that they think is valuable to the process is now being taken away from it. And so again, you've got to show them what's in it for them, and really focus in on what they're getting out of the process, how it's going to make their life better or get them home quicker at the end of the day, or whatever you're trying to solve with that. Always remember the what's in it for me when it comes to your people, and that'll go a long way.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions here. And this is, again, along the same lines. Persuading our people to embrace technology has been tough. If we go digital with our project management, what kind of learning curve can we look forward to, a best case scenario, if you can offer one?
Yeah, so kind of going back to the every company is unique. Each company is unique when it comes to the learning curve as well. But what we tend to see, again, if you're focusing really hard on solving a pain point, so it's something that people already struggle with and they want to change, and you're doing it with an intuitive solution that's delivered via the cloud on either mobile or a browser-based device, that really speeds up the time frame in the process. And so you could see people making the shift. We talked about the time card. Typically, when we help companies roll out the time card, it's less than a week for the craft to be spun up on that. But some of the other systems, it could take a little bit more time to start understanding, like cost and forecasting, and your really intense processes. Those could take a month to really dissect and figure out the new steps. So it's shorter than it used to be. It's not years anymore. Let's say that. It's not what we used to see with like a major ERP implementation where it took 2 to 3 to 4 years. I'd say it's not even a year any longer. You're looking at these digital transformations as something that can be consumed in a month to a few months with these newer technologies.
And on the topic of newer technologies, we'll close with this question. You've mentioned a couple of technologies over the last decade that have changed the game for construction. What are some others that you've seen make a major impact?
So outside of things like mobility and in the cloud, I think just some of the things around mobility, location-based technology, knowing where you're at and when you're there, has made a major leap forward. The camera in everybody's pocket has made for some drastic changes to the way things are tracked and what you can do with change management. The boosts in cellular data networks that can handle all of this, so that you can be in kind of that constant connected state, which doesn't always work, for remote projects, but for a lot of the bigger projects around cities, you're seeing that boost in the cellular technology really helping as well. So those are all different parts and pieces that have made for some big changes that are things you could look for in a solution that you might be chasing. But there's a number of things coming, like drones, which we poked a little fun at, and robotic technology that is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, AJ. That does it for our time, which brings our webinar to a close. Thank you all for your questions today and joining us this afternoon. I'd like to thank AJ for a great presentation. And we'll be sending out an email shortly to share access to the playback for today's event. But please feel free also to visit constructionbusinessowner.com to check out more on this topic and even more educational webinars. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Bye.